Welcome back to the Power of Sport. Today I'm joined by Mark Lawrie OBE, Chief Executive of StreetGames, a charity that has spent over 2 decades harnessing sport to drive change in the UK's most underserved neighbourhoods. Mark's journey with StreetGames goes back to 2008 when he joined to manage the National Young Volunteers Programme. He went on to found Get Berkshire Active, before returning to StreetGames as Deputy CEO in 2013 to help deliver 1,000 neighbourhood doorstep sports clubs. He's led the organisation since 2021, and today StreetGames works with over 1,600 locally trusted organisations across the country. Last year, Mark was awarded an OBE for his services to education and young people. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Xavier. Nice to be here.
And you. So I was just saying to Mark off air that when we launched the podcast back in February this year, and I was asking around people in the sport for good sector who I should be speaking to, Mark's name came up in a lot of those conversations. So really pleased to have you here. Mark, let's start with a big question. So when you talk about sport being blocked by poverty, what does that look like day to day for a young person growing up in one of these communities?
Yeah, it's multifaceted, I guess, Xavier. So the first thing, obviously, is that very often sport costs money, and the young people we work with, the data we've got shows that the families they come from have often got around £1.40 a week as a family to spend on sport and active leisure. So that pretty much rules out the opportunity to even swim. You can't afford a single swim, but it's not just about the money. There are some of the hidden barriers, I suppose, like cost of kit and equipment that people don't often think about. Young people not having the right trainers, not feeling that they're adequately equipped to come and take part in sport. And for many of the communities we're talking about, there just aren't the sports clubs and the opportunities to play. So we find that many of the more deprived communities around the country are a bit of a sporting desert. So there aren't hockey clubs, netball clubs, rugby clubs that young people can easily access. And I suppose the final thing I'd say is just about the horizons of these young people, because for very many of them, they live their lives in a very small neighbourhood, which is probably about a mile square, where they might go to school, they'll go to the shops, they might go to the park, but they won't travel outside of their neighbourhood, partly for concerns around safety, but also because that's where they've lived, that's the space they live their lives in, and so they won't travel 5 miles across town to go to a leisure provider or go to a new club.
No, and so how do StreetGames help with this challenge?
So you mentioned the 1,600 organisations that we support. What we support them to do is to provide sport right on the doorstep of young people. So where they live, where they feel safe. It can be a formal sports facility. It can be a kind of an artificial pitch or small sports hall. But very often it can be a patch of grass in the middle of their estate or their local youth club where they feel safe to go. And we support those organisations by training them to deliver different sports. So very often, you won't be surprised with the World Cup just having finished, that football is often the things that hooks a lot of young people in. But we try and broaden the offer with young people and work with a range of different sports that suit both boys and young women and girls. So we do work with dance fitness, but we'd also work with basketball, with hockey, with cycling, with other sports, trying to broaden the offer. And then through training those adults who work in those locally trusted organisations, we can provide sport right where young people are as a kind of platform for them to experience the things that more affluent young people experience.
And that bit's clear. But when you're working with one of these neighbourhood organisations, are they then able to offer sport and participation for free, or is there still a payment that they have to ask for?
So it's very often for free. So one of the other things that we do with the kind of wraparound offer that we provide to these organisations, we help them with their funding. So very often these organisations are used to bid fundraising and looking for sources of support. So we will support them with fundraising bids where we can. In other places, if I think about Birmingham and Newcastle, we'll work with some of the larger statutory organisations like the local authority or the police and crime commissioner to try and support resources flowing into these neighbourhoods. Because while some of the organisations might charge 50p or a pound, the vast majority of them have to provide things for free. Otherwise, young people can't access them.
Okay, so you're not actually directly paying for the young people to do this, but you are helping them to understand where the funding might come from, and you're bringing it together so that they can offer it for nothing.
Absolutely. Sometimes we have funding to give them. So some partners will offer us funding to give out to them. So yeah. Okay.
And when it comes to, so not just the sessions, but when it comes to the kit, or I mean, you mentioned the 1 mile radius thing, but if they do have to travel to get there, and kit and things, is that something you get involved with?
Yeah, so we're really lucky actually. We're the charity partner to Team GB at the moment, and we actually, one of the things that we do with them is we pass on the surplus kit to the locally trusted organisation so that they can give that to young people to wear if they're taking part. And we also support, there's some really creative local organisations who do kit exchanges. So they have like almost like a shed or a share shack where people can bring pairs of trainers that they're not wearing anymore, or sports kit that they're not using anymore, and that can then be shared with other young people who need it. So it's really good for the environment, actually, apart from breaking down one of the barriers to poverty for young people.
Yeah, I was talking to an organisation earlier this week that's in the kind of kit recycling bit, and there seems to be a real emergence of that, which is great. And so kind of at a very like at government level, what is, I get a bit confused, I must admit, because I see that Sport England's data shows that there was more participation, yet I also hear that from other areas that there's less and less, and I see football club, I see an under 12 at a club local to me being asked to pay £500 for a year's subscription and things, and I see council pitches sitting empty at 110 quid a session. That's why they're empty, and all of this horrible stuff. But what do you see that government is doing really well, and then we'll come on to what you think they could do better.
I think government, and I mean, obviously government often in this world work through Sport England as their arm's length body. One of the things I think they're doing really well is they're focusing on inequality. So when you look at the Uniting the Movement strategy, and then you look at the kind of policies of this government, they are focusing on the right places and the right audiences. So they're directing resources to the places where we would be keen to see them directed. And they're trying as well, which again I think is positive, to not just spend the limited money that sport has. So sport has around 300 million a year from government, which when you consider the billions that go into other areas is a tiny amount of money. But what they're trying to do is work in partnership with other departments across government to show the power of sport and how sport can make a difference to public health, to criminal justice, to the priorities around active travel and the environment. And so those intents around connecting sport and physical activity into other areas, I do think are really, really positive.
Yeah. No, that's good. And what would you really like them, what would you like government and I guess Sport England to be doing to support inequality further, to get more kids playing sport, to get more equipped to play sport? What would you like to see? Other than more money.
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus where I talked about connecting to different policy areas, the focus is often quite high up, so it's a local government senior director, chief exec level. I'd really like to see the leaders of the organisations that we work with involved in the decision making, involved in the planning, shaping what's needed to genuinely tackle these inequalities. And the other thing I'd like to see as an extension of that is the young people, because they have a real clear view about what they want to see. They're not lacking in ambition when it comes to sport and physical activity. We did a piece of research a couple of years ago where we talked to 1,000 young people from low-income backgrounds, and 75% of them said they wanted to do more sport and physical activity. But I'm not sure their voices around the table when we're talking about how resources get used, how plans get drawn up. So that would definitely be a positive change, I think, in engagement and involvement of those who are closest to the issues, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a really powerful stat, isn't it? 75%. And I mean, I do a lot so I run a national sports bank that's just getting going, and one of the big things we're looking at is obviously the girls specific sport poverty. Do you have specific strategies for girls, and and views on the high numbers dropping out of sport and how that can be addressed specifically?
Yeah, so we have a program and an approach called Us Girls that we developed with National Lottery money a good few years ago, which is really about developing the right conditions for girls and young women to play, because what we've found is that the motivations for them to play can be quite different to boys at times. So for girls, the phrase we always use is fun, fitness and friends. So in designing of local activity and working with locally trusted organisations on this, it's all about making sure that those things are incorporated, that you don't just go straight away for a competitive sporting offer that won't appeal to girls. And also the work that we've done through Us Girls has shown that you sometimes need to grow the trust of girls and young women before they feel confident to participate in sport and physical activity. So many of the organisations that we work with might do activities first that are around lifestyle. They might do something like, we ran a big program in the Northwest around yoga, and the girls and young women who got involved in that became really positively engaged, and some of them then moved on to more formal types of sport like basketball or like regular attendance at the gym. So those kinds of activities are what support young women and girls. And importantly, and you'll know this, for some young women and girls, they want their own sessions. They don't want sessions with boys, particularly in the teenage years. I think a large part of the drop-off, I have two daughters who are both older now, but I think a large part of the drop-off is the attention of boys within PE or those kinds of environments, and what girls want is a safe space for them to participate on their terms and to be able to lead activity in a way that works for them.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And with kind of like sports power to help address things like mental health and self-esteem and all the rest of it, are you using sport within, when you're coaching coaches, when you're helping to get people delivering these activities, is the kind of mentoring component of that really significant?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about a kind of sport plus approach. So the sport in itself can develop some of the things that you mentioned there. So you can get confidence just from developing a new skill, or you can learn communication just through playing. But the intentional bits that sit around that are then really important. So we talk about the kinds of coaches that we have having a blend of sports coaching and youth work skills, so that they can help young people to think not just about how they're going to be a better player, but also how they want to develop, what are their ambitions, trying to open their minds a little bit to what's possible, taking very small steps. And a lot of this is done by stealth. It's not sign up to a program and be mentored. So it's very informal in the way that it works, but it tends to move young people from being involved in activity to then perhaps becoming more involved in the organization. So they might just help a little bit with putting cones out or doing a little bit with the younger ones. And then beyond that to maybe having a more formal role as a volunteer or a leader themselves. And that kind of supported journey is the kind of thing that really tackles those things you just talked about, like mental health, things like whether or not they choose to get involved in antisocial behaviour, because a lot of the work we've done in the criminal justice sector has been about developing what we call a pro-social identity, so that they see themselves as a positive individual who's going to be a sports coach for other children, rather than somebody who's antisocial, who hangs around with the wrong other young people and gets themselves involved in trouble. So absolutely, that whole piece around mentoring, volunteering, leadership, individual growth has to be intentional, and we work as hard with the local leaders on that as we do on the sports side, really.
Give me some give the listeners some kind of, I guess, some big scary stats, Mark, around sport participation. And your £1.40 figure at the beginning just immediately set the scene, right? But just give us some data around it. What is the extent of sport poverty in this country that we all need to address together?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the things I would share, it's hard to get a handle on the sport poverty bit, because you mentioned Sport England's data. The Active Lives data shows a significant gap, so a 13 to 15% gap between the most affluent and the least affluent in terms of participation. But I don't think that really tells the whole story, because if you look at the data around poverty in the UK, we're now up to nearly 5 million children and young people living in poverty in the UK, 3.8 million children and young people living in poverty in the 30% most deprived areas of England. And when you start to hear the kinds of numbers you're talking about, and then you look at the things that contribute to whether they play sport or not. So nearly £1 billion taken out of youth services in the last 10 years, or 15 years, many of the organisations we support would have been funded by that provision to provide youth activities, including sport, on the doorstep of young people. The other stat that I think is quite significant, and some people might see it as a luxury, is that if you're a young person from a low-income background, you're 2/3 less likely to ever have been to a major sporting event. Now, inspiration, as we both know, comes from getting to go to stuff like that, and we run an inspiration campaign that is all about free access to tickets for young people to go to those events. But when that gap is that significant, that means for so many of those young people, they're not getting those inspiring experiences in sport. So I think the gap in active lives does tell a story. It is stubborn. The reductions in sport as part of that are quite serious as well, because active lives also measures walking and cycling for purposes of getting to school or college. Now, lots of the young people we work with do that because they can't afford the bus, or their parents are at work and they can't give them a lift. So there's some masking, I suppose, in the figures around just how serious this gap is.
Yes. And do you think it is realistic to ever reach a situation, or in a reasonable time frame, where every young person that wants to play sport can play sport? Do you think that's a goal that we should have? And do you think it is a realistic goal?
I absolutely think it's a goal we should have. It's set out in our strategy as our end game, that every young person who wants to can. I think it demands a way of thinking and working that is hard. Like, for these things to really work for young people, if you go to an estate in Hull, one of the ones I was on a few weeks ago, the only realistic place to play sport would be on the school site. And the school isn't available in the hours that young people want to play it. When the school's closed, the sports facilities are closed. So for us to get to that scenario, it would mean breaking down the barriers between school provision, community provision, and leisure provision, and everybody in a place that is more deprived working together to make sure that there is a range of activity available to young people so they can play sport. And it's really hard because all of those partners I've just mentioned have got their own priorities. They've all got limited resources. Everybody is dealing with shrinking amounts of money. So to have that vision and commit to working in that way, it does happen. We see it in pockets where you get that amazing scenario where the housing association, the school, the youth club, and the leisure centre are all absolutely working to provide things for young people. So I do think it's possible. And we've been doing some work recently on poverty proofing with an organisation called Children North East that starts to look at how do you really make sport available to those who have no money in a particular neighbourhood or area.
That's really good to hear. And I had the privilege of meeting the chief executive of Trussell Trust recently, and a lot of the conversation was around informal networks and how, you know, they're not going to end food banks alone, but that is their stated vision, to end food banks, and it has to be around informal networks and, you know, providing advice as well as food and debt management help and mental health support for people who just don't feel they can get into the workplace, and all of these great things, but working in harmony. Do you find that kind of informal networks is a thing that is getting increasingly bandied about in a good way?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done some work in Greater Manchester where there's been a real encouragement, rather than all of these different community organisations, voluntary organisations competing for funding. They've come together and looked at how can we work together with a set amount of money and then divide it up by need rather than by everybody bidding and some winning and some losing. So absolutely. And in the area that the Trussell Trust and Emma work in, we've done a lot of work over the last few years around the combination of food and sport, because many of the young people, as you'll know, come to holiday provision without food. So being able to feed them as well as give them the opportunity to play is a perfect combination. So the kind of informal partnerships between community organisations that deliver youth activity and those who are looking to provide families with food can be really, really positive. But it takes time and it takes real will to make all that happen.
Yeah. So I guess two big questions. One is what, and you can answer them together or whatever. But one is, what does StreetGames look like in 5 years, and what does the landscape for kids in sport poverty look like in that time frame?
5 years. It always feels like when we talk about these neighbourhoods, some of them have been in the same deprived category for 50 years now, and 5 years sometimes feels like a bit of a drop in the ocean. I do think there's a really positive opportunity over the next 5 years. We understand that the Sport England 5-year plan for uniting the movement is going to put children and young people from low affluence backgrounds as one of its targeted priorities. Now, for us, that means that our work is both to continue to grow the impact in the places we work. So we target around 20 places quite heavily in the country, as well as giving a broader offer to the other members of our 1,600 open network. But I think in 5 years' time, what I'd really hope is that we've influenced the way that lots of other organisations think about these young people. So I mentioned leisure trusts and leisure centres. So them being more aware in 5 years' time of how they can make sport accessible to these young people. National governing bodies of sport, we want to do a lot of work with them over the next 5 years to help them plan for making their sport more accessible on the ground. And then the other structures that sit around sport, like youth services and others, how do we make sure that they're including young people? So it does feel, I'm quite excited actually about the next 5 years. We've had periods where we felt a bit like we're treading water, but it does feel like Street Games has a role to play in sharing what we know. And the name of the game for us has never been for us to be a huge organization. It's really to mainstream what we know so that other organizations include the young people we're concerned about.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mark, tell us in one sentence what to you is the power of sport?
Sport delivered in the right way genuinely transforms young people's lives.
Yeah, perfect. And in terms of kind of in one sentence, how you see Street Games evolving in the next 5 years? What's the big evolution? What's the big change for Street Games?
That point about embedding what we know about how to engage young people from low-income backgrounds in sport in the minds and practice of lots of other organizations across the sector.
Great. And while we're on the rhythm, your one message to an 11-year-old who around the importance of sport, what would you say to that 11-year-old?
Sport is for you, and it's more than what you see when you're at school in your PE lesson. There will be a kind of sport that suits you, and it won't just give you the chance to play. It will give you the chance to find happiness, find joy, have fun, and build skills that will help you for the rest of your life.
That's brilliant. And one message to government?
Keep the focus on inequality, but let's involve the local organisations and the young people in the plans and the investment that's coming to these places. Brilliant.
Mark, thanks so much for coming on The Power of Sport. It's amazing work that Street Games are doing, and it feels like certainly the next few years are in good hands with people like you at the helm of it. So thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Xavier. Nice to meet you.